We're back with another episode of the Walk-On Redshirts podcast. William and I are here. We got a special guest this week, CBS Sports' own Shehan Jeyarajah. Thanks for joining us.
He might not be able to hear us. We didn't warn him about the intro, Jake.
I gotcha. Thank you so much for having me.
We did not warn him that it is a little bit loud, but it's good and we like it. So, it works.
Gets you ready.
Exactly. Gets you ready. Appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you taking some time out of here to talk about the Big Ten. This week, we're doing the second half of our Big Ten, looking at the eastern half of the Big Ten, what is really would have been the old Big Ten East until they added 4 more teams and decided to go to 18 with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State we're looking at Michigan State, Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois, Northwestern, Purdue. Shehan, I think the main storyline when you look at this year, though, you can talk about the transfer, you can talk about the NIL money, but Michigan's the reigning national champion. They won the national championship, and they don't have Jim Harbaugh this year. Sherrone Moore is a very familiar name. Coached a bunch last year, took over for Jim Harbaugh during the suspensions. How do you think Michigan is different this year with Sherrone Moore at the helm versus how Jim Harbaugh handled things?
Well, I think what's going to be interesting is less in the short term, the Harbaugh versus Moore difference, because, a lot of the ways that they do things are going to be very similar, but it's the attrition that they had, right? The number of awesome players. They had so many 4th and 5th year seniors on this 2023 team. There's a reason that they kind of decided this is the year we're putting everything into this. We will push any and all NCAA investigations to the future because we want to preserve this season. And amazingly, they came through. I mean, I really still am a little bit shocked that it happened, but all the credit to Michigan. I think, though, that what you have to look at with this team and what they're going to do well is on defense. I mean, they have one of the best interior defensive tackle combinations in the country. Like last year, it was Texas who kind of had that with Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat. This year, it's going to be Michigan with the 2 guys that they've got coming back. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, I believe, are the 2 names. And they're going to be dominant against the run. They're going to be one of the best teams in the country defending the run. And by the way, for anybody who picked up the EA college football game last week, they might see number 1 in their player rankings is their cornerback, Will Johnson, as well. So they've got playmakers at every level of the field. And what they don't have returning, I mean, they've developed at such a high level consistently. So you just kind of expect them to keep backfilling on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively is that's where things get real interesting because Sherrone Moore.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say Sherrone Moore, of course, was the offensive coordinator. He put a lot of this offense together. But are we just doing the Alex Orji thing at quarterback, right? They didn't let him throw last year. They lost all of their top wide receivers. Donovan Edwards gives them something to build around, but also, by the way, most of their offensive line is gone from last year's team. It's a full-scale rebuild on that side of the ball, and that makes it one of the more difficult units to predict in this conference.
Yeah, and I think one thing they have going for them in terms of offense and being able to rebuild, Shehan, to add on to that is 2 things. Number 1, last year, there was times where they just took the air out of the ball and didn't even let J.J. McCarthy throw the ball. I mean, I think it was Penn State. They threw the ball 8 times, right?
They ran 34 straight times, I believe, against Penn State to basically end the game. That's
what happens when your offensive line coach is your offensive coordinator, by the way. And this year, they come in with the 17th ranked strength of schedule in the year, according to College Football Network. And that's going to be tough. Defense, like you said, is going to handle themselves, but how do you replace a lot of talent? Dylan Edwards coming back does help a lot. And Alex Orji, I think, is Donovan Edwards, sorry. Dylan Edwards is down in Kansas State
yes.
Yeah, Kansas State. And Alex Orji, I think, is a better runner than J.J. McCarthy is. And I think you might see them just embrace that Big Ten old school football running the football because honestly, that would be a good spin, in my opinion, because in a world in which you're seeing a lot of spread offenses and a lot of spread offenses coming to the Big Ten, if you go to revert and go with that smash mouth football, that might be tough for teams to combat, especially when they're not used to seeing that week in and week out.
Yeah, we've seen Michigan over the last however many years. They got creative, especially under Jim Harbaugh. There's always the one play where they have the 11 guys lined up in a row and you have no idea where they're all going to line up. They've gotten creative and then just, thrown as many offensive linemen on the line just to smash it down your throat. Blake Corum, was getting 4, 5, 6 yards every time. They would just try to kill the clock as long as possible. You talk about their defensive line. I believe it was Kenneth Grant in that Penn State game as well, who chased down a running back like 20 yards down the field. It was right around midfield. And Kenneth Grant is not a small dude. 350 pounds, running down the field and chasing down a running back is almost unheard of in the sport of football. I know these guys are athletic freaks, but chasing him down, basically running a sub-5 to run down a running back is insane. And that Michigan defense, there's going to have to be the key for them because Alex Orji, week 2, I think it is, they play Texas.
Yeah.
That's not going to be an easy game. Like, that is not going to be an easy game at all. Texas is obviously going to be one of the favorites to make the college football playoff this year. And is Orji going to be ready? I think it was in the Rose Bowl when they played against Alabama. They let Orji throw the ball once, and it went like brutally. It looked like it was potentially going to be intercepted. And then they were just like, yeah, no, you're done. You're not doing that anymore. If you come in the game, you're running the ball. We're not putting that ball in the air anymore. We're not letting it happen.
Quick question. When do we get the first Orji joke from RG3?
We already did. Didn't we get one last year? It's already happened.
You're right.
It's oh my gosh. It's going to be something, right? I mean, look, here's the reality. We had a quarterback who nearly won the Heisman Trophy, whose name was Penix. And so I feel like here's the thing. You just got to be good enough for us to move past it.
That's true.
Alex Orji is not there yet. That's the issue. He's going to be the new guy on the block. But you mentioned that schedule, right? They get Texas at home in week 2. That's a pretty tough game. Week 4, USC versus Michigan is going to be a fascinating contrast of styles. I'm sure you guys talked about them last week. And I think we're going to learn a lot, frankly, about both these teams because the issue that you run into if you are a run team with an offensive line that isn't as good as what they've had the last 3 years, which maybe it will be. Maybe I'm underselling what this line will be. But if they are a step back, is that when you get off schedule, it's really hard for you to get back into games. And that's been such a strength. And with J.J. McCarthy, when he came in, that was a big difference between when he was quarterback versus when Caden McNamara was quarterback a couple of years before that, was that he was able to make some of those big third down throws, right? He was able to play at distance. I don't necessarily trust Alex Orji at this point in his career to be that player. So I view them as a team that's going to be very competitive. I think that I've said to people over and over again, like, this is the most like, all right, that was fine, 9-3 team in the Big Ten this year.
Honestly, this might be a weird thing to say, but I think their ceiling is 2001 Miami, where they had a decent quarterback who ended up having a pretty good NFL career, but the defense was just phenomenal. And the floor is you get something like the Baltimore Ravens of 2001, where the defense is phenomenal. They ended up winning the Super Bowl, but Trent Dilfer scoring 10 points
Both
a game.
These teams won national championship.
The Super Bowl and the ceiling is the national championship.
Well, listen, Colorado is playing for the Super Bowl every week, so we know the Super Bowl is less than the national championship. But jokes aside, like I think the defense is able to get them and lift them up to a good spot. I mean, you miss some of the good teams, but you have to play Ohio State. You have to play Oregon. And then, like you're saying, you have to play Texas. But the rest of their schedule, you're playing a bunch of people who are unknown. I mean, what is Minnesota this year? What is USC this year? What is Washington this year? Like Michigan State, they're getting all these different programs with different head coaches. Northwestern, I think, is the only other coach that has somebody coming back. Maybe Illinois.
Illinois still got Burt.
Okay, yeah. So he's there. So it's like all these, and then obviously PJ Fleck in Minnesota. But you're getting a lot of new coaches, a lot of new identities. The Big Ten is going to be really weird this year.
One name that hasn't been talked about here is Colston Loveland, who might be the best tight end in the country. And when you have a new quarterback like Alex Orji coming in, having an established tight end like that, who is almost going to be guaranteed a first or second round pick this upcoming draft, is going to probably be his best friend other than Donovan Edwards this year. Michigan hasn't really had many great wide receivers over the last, honestly, decade. None of those wide receivers were great. I mean, Roman Wilson was a really good player, but if you had taken him and put him on any of the other really top 10 teams, would he have been the number one option? Probably not. He probably would have been maybe number 2, number 3 on some of those teams. Like if he went on Texas, he wouldn't have even cracked the top 3 last year.
Right.
But when you look at their wide receivers, they don't have anybody that really looks at you and goes, wow, like that guy's a game breaker. He's going to be able to go score, twice, have 150 yards. But Colston Loveland, like that guy can play. Like that guy is going to become their leading receiver. I can feel it in my bones already that Sherrone Moore is going to run the ball hard and he's going to give the ball to Colston Loveland.
Yeah. And then just to correct myself, instead of referencing 2 national championship winning teams. I meant to say their floor is Iowa, where they just play really good defense and punt the ball a lot. But I think it was good content.
Brian Ferentz. I hear he's really good at being an offensive coordinator.
Yeah, he's excellent.
So their arch rival, Ohio State, has rumored to spend $20 million, according to what Ryan Day is, go out and use NIL. They bring back a ton of players on the offense and defensive line, or offense and defense, period. Plus, they bring in Quinshon Judkins. They bring in Caleb Downs, Will Howard. Like, they're talking about the ceiling is they have to win a national championship. Like, that's what it is this year. They haven't beaten Michigan since 2019. The pressure could not feel any higher in Columbus. And I'm not sure that that's unreasonable to think with what they did, last year, where they fell short. The Cotton Bowl against Missouri was kind of a weird game. Devin Brown was supposed to play, gets hurt like in the first quarter. They have true freshman Lincoln Keenholz out there, and they're not even letting him throw the ball because he doesn't really even know the offense. They're trying to run the ball, but Missouri knows they're running the ball. It was kind of a weird Cotton Bowl, but Michigan, Kyle McCord was the starting quarterback. They have a chance. They go down the field. McCord throws an interception, with under a minute left. Like, it's reasonable to say the expectation should be national championship. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not. I mean, frankly, this is my preseason number 1 team. I think that not only can they be the preseason number 1, I think they should, because frankly, they deserve that pressure. Like, with what they've done this offseason, with the way that they've built, with the retentions that they've had. I mean, it's crazy, the fact that Jack Sawyer is still on this team, right? It's crazy, the fact that JT Tuimoloau is still on this team. That makes no sense whatsoever that he's still on this team, but that's how much they invested to try to keep this core together. They bring in Caleb Downs, a player who is rumored cost quite a chunk of NIL change. And also, by the way, they've got Jeremiah Smith coming at receiver. They bring back Emeka Egbuka. They bring in Quinshon Judkins to go with Travion Henderson. One of the craziest combinations that you're going to see in college football this year. The only thing that I think could potentially derail them, other than I try to avoid getting into dumb sports talk brain, but the one thing is does Ryan Day just have it? Because it's been multiple games now that bad decisions or mistakes have just cost them at the end of games. I generally don't think that that's a thing, but it just keeps happening, right? It keeps happening. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing, the actual football analysis is, I mean, part of the reason that this Cotton Bowl was so bad was how much their offensive line struggled. And a lot of those guys are going to be the players who are going to be leading this team in 2024. By the way, they also brought over the center from Alabama who struggled to snap the ball in the Rose Bowl in Seth McLaughlin. Now, look, I think that you kind of just have to hope that changes, right? This is somebody who snapped the ball for a long time. He looked like he maybe got the yips a little bit. Maybe he didn't connect very well with Jalen Milroe's cadence. You just don't know what these things, and you kind of hope with a senior quarterback and Will Howard that's just going to solve itself. But this is an offensive line that certainly doesn't look like the one from maybe 2 years ago that was one of the best in the country, or 3 years ago, some of the really good CJ Stroud lines. That's the one piece that you're looking at and hey, this could derail things if it really doesn't go right. But otherwise, I mean, this is one of the most on paper stacked rosters of the entire college football playoff era. And I think that when you look at teams, especially in this 4-team to 12-team era, that really have not just that desire, but expectation to win a national championship. I mean, Ohio State has a legitimate case as the team with the most pressure to win a title that we've seen in the playoff era. Now, it's a 12-team playoff. It's going to be different. We don't know how that dynamic is going to impact things. And also, by the way, short of them somehow going 5-7, they're probably not going to fire Ryan Day. The question is, could he be rehomed somewhere else? Could he land in the NFL somewhere, right? Could it be suggested to him that maybe this is not a place he's going to be long term? I think that's maybe a conversation that we could be having, but frankly, there's no reason that this team shouldn't be there right with everybody at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit of a personal experience. So my first couple years at Clemson, we couldn't beat South Carolina. Dabo couldn't beat South Carolina. and we're winning 10 games, winning 9 games, winning 11 games, going to the ACC.
It's crazy to think about in hindsight.
And people wanted to fire him just because they couldn't beat South Carolina. This is very similar to what's going on with Ryan Day right now. And that's one of the things that makes college football so beautiful, is that these rivalries are so important that they will literally fire a legendary coach or a coach who has a winning pedigree because you can't beat one team. And I love that. However, I think Ryan Day gets that monkey off his back this year. I think that offense is too loaded. And the best way to help an inexperienced or a struggling offensive line is to have weapons and be able to get the ball out quick. And you have 2 All-American running backs in Shehan Jeyarajah and Trevion Henderson. Like, you don't get that anywhere. That helps your offensive line. And if you can get the ball moving, and it also helps the offensive line if you can keep a defense on their toes. You have weapons on the outside in Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. And if the defense doesn't know what you're doing, they can't load the box, they can't drop people back, they can't go into dime coverage. You can give your offensive line advantages in places where you wouldn't have normally had it. And in that Missouri game, yeah, they're going to struggle because they took the air out of the football. They're not going to throw it. They know what they're going to do. They can, these guys are D1 athletes for a reason. But I also want to ask you another question, Shehan. So Ryan Day is out here saying it's costing $20 million for his team. And that might be real. Is there a possibility that he's saying that because he knows that everyone wants to copy Ohio State and he can empty the pockets of all his rivals, because now they're thinking they have to pay $20 million a year to keep up with Ohio State when that's actually not the bar that's being set? It could be way less. I wouldn't doubt if that's what's actually happening, because $20 million seems insane. But again, I didn't play in the NIL world. I didn't even get a scholarship, so I don't know what it's like to get money from a school. But that's something I would think that someone like him would do. Like, these coaches are really smart and they're good at playing these PR games.
Yeah, no, and besides, you would have played in the name, image, and likeness of Jesus Christ too, over at Clemson as well.
That's right.
But no, I mean, I think that 20 million is a huge number, and I'm curious, when you start saying numbers like that, is that for this one roster, for this 1 year, we're paying for this 1 year, 20 million? Is it saying, oh, we agreed to contracts that might involve multiple years and unguaranteed? You just don't know what that necessarily means. Now, I will say, right, with this House versus NCAA settlement, we're starting to get some idea of what numbers might be revenue shared. And for an athletic department, it could be about $22 million. So this isn't going to be completely out of whack with what happens. Now, not all of that will go to football, it must be said. But I do think, like, if you told me that for the single year roster, right, that we're talking $15 million, I mean, it's a lot. I don't think that it's completely incomprehensible either. Like, this is how much for this level of team. And the other piece that I'll mention is, like, when you are in that transfer portal in the post-fall and post-spring windows, there's such a scarcity there, right? If you want to gain some top-level players, like I this is not me, like, reporting, but, like, a kid like Caleb Downs could fetch $1 million. Right. Mm-hmm. And potentially you're signing him to a multi-year contract because he has 2 years left. So that's like where you start to really get into these. Wow, this costs this much. Right. Will Howard, maybe you get into a bidding war with USC for his services. I don't know exactly what he would land at, but that's how you end up in that situation. And by the way, look at some of the recruits that they landed in this class of 2024. Look at, I think they have like 3 top 10 guys in the class of 2025. So I do think that, one, they are definitely throwing money around. I don't know that it's $20 million, but it is a lot of money. 2, when a coach makes a statement like that, yes, it's definitely to try to put pressure on his opponents. It's also to try to rally the boosters and say, this is what it costs to make this happen. You don't build a roster like this just by, nice relationships. That's right. Not why Caleb Downs picked Ohio State. He picked it because of money and because of opportunity. And certainly, we'll see whether it works out for him. But this is one of the things too, that when you just talk about this NIL era, it's completely smoke and mirrors. We don't know how much anything costs. I've heard, I've heard people be like, well, this player got offered $1 million to not go, and then you go do 5 seconds of research into it, and you're like, this doesn't make any sense, right? I was at Mountain West Media Days, and Colorado State's coach Jay Norvell said, well, my quarterback got offered $600,000 or something like that to go to Kansas State. Well, Kansas State has a quarterback, right? Like, they're not paying a kid $600,000 to be the backup who's the same year as Avery Johnson, right? So this is one of those things that you have the ability to shape your message in so many different ways. But my first thought would be that it's Ryan Day telling his boosters, you want to be competitive, you got to pony up.
Yeah, and another thing, like I'm thinking about too, like you talked about the recruiting class. Sorry, Jake, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I don't think, and I'm racking my brain. I don't think I've ever heard of incoming freshmen having more pressure on them that's not a quarterback than Jeremiah Smith. I mean, can y'all think of another big time recruit that's not a quarterback that's coming in their first year that people are expecting the world from? I mean, they're essentially handing him the Blitnikoff before the season started, and he hasn't even played a snap. Granted, he might be great, but that is a lot of pressure on he's essentially a senior in high school. I mean, what is this? I don't think I've ever seen that before.
I do think in practice, like he needs to be a contributor. There's no doubt about it, right? I think in practice though, right? They've got Carnell Tate coming back. They've got Emeka Egbuka coming back. They've got multiple high level guys, and he just needs, like, if he has 3 awesome plays in key games this season, I think that'll be enough. He doesn't have to be a 1,000-yard guy, but I mean, when you talk about losing Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the best receivers that we've seen in college football over the past 5 years, and people already making comparisons to him. It's a lot, right? I mean, it truly is a lot. And I mean, certainly you can make some of the comparisons, one with quarterbacks, like you mentioned, kids like Nico going to Tennessee, kids like Arch Manning, of course, going to Texas. But, you know, when you talk about guys expected to contribute, I mean, Luther Burden was one going to Missouri who was kind of asked to flip that program. But certainly the thought was, oh, well, he needs to be a big part of our team from day one, but he doesn't need to contribute to a 10 or 11 win team until year 2 or 3, right? Like, this is a different kind of situation at a program, by the way, that isn't used to necessarily demanding that freshmen be something special immediately because they just got so much talent.
Well, he has to be that good too, because obviously Julian Fleming leaves. I mean, I don't think he leaves because he doesn't think I think he leaves because he thinks he's not going to be the top 3 guy. He's going to be at least 4.
Sure.
So you can go be a number 1 at Penn State. But anyway, that was strange to me. Luther Burden, I think, is a really good comp.
What about my Texan guy, Bryant Wesco at Clemson? Isn't he going to have to save that offense?
That's true. Him and TJ Moore, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them. And Cade Klubnik added to that at ACC Media Day when they asked who's going to be a big difference maker. Bryant Wesco, just wait and see. So I'm like, man, all right. I'm
Jake, I'm sorry. We'll let you talk now.
I was going to say the only other person I could think of would be Travis Hunter because of how he flipped his decision on signing day and obviously going with Coach Brown to Jackson State and now obviously in Colorado. I was going to say that's the only other one that I can think of with a high-level expectations, but it's very different when he's going to play an HBCU rather than automatically going and playing at Florida State like people thought he would.
And actually, that's a good reminder, too, of Jordan Seaton, the left tackle 5-star who's going to be asked to be potentially their best offensive lineman from day one at Colorado.
Yes.
So I think that people are accelerating this stuff so much because here's the other part of it, too, is that the idea of being a developmental player, you know, Caden Proctor, right, at Alabama, like he didn't sit for a year. He started right away. And people are like, well, if you're not ready now, we got to bring in somebody who is ready, even if it's for your sophomore year. So I think there's never been less patience in college football. And certainly, I mean, I'm not super worried about how they're going to treat Jeremiah Smith, and I think he's going to be a great player, but it's a different world definitely out there than it was, I mean, 5 or 10 years ago, whenever we were in school.
Right. And one other topic that's kind of changing with college football is this kind of segues me to that because stuff is changing. You now have head coaches leaving to become coordinators. Chip Kelly left UCLA to be the offensive coordinator of Ohio State. I mean, there was rumors for a long time that Chip Kelly wasn't really happy at UCLA. He was kind of looking for a way out. There was talk about, well, he was going to get fired, and then he won too many games, basically. So it's like, well, he doesn't want to be there. They don't want him there, and neither of them can figure out how to get out of there because he won 9 games. But Chip Kelly goes to Ohio State. Supposedly Ryan Day is going to take his hand off the play calling. And now you've got one thing he had talked about was an experienced play caller, except we can't forget about Bill O'Brien spending 2 weeks in Columbus. He spent 2 weeks there, basically. Changed the culture. It was without him, it'd be a completely different program.
Who could forget? Did he get a ring, Jake? Does he get a ring when y'all win the match?
He might. You know, he has the apparel. I don't know if he rented an apartment. I don't know what he did. But there's obviously trust with Chip Kelly because I believe Ryan Day played under Chip Kelly at New Hampshire. I believe Chip Kelly was the offensive coordinator when Ryan Day was a quarterback there. So very close ties. They've known each other for a long, long time. If he's going to give it the play calling, it makes sense that he gives them up to Chip Kelly. Surprised that it wasn't the first option, but I'm guessing there was some sort of contract issues. Timing didn't work out. And would love to hear your thoughts on Chip Kelly going to be an offensive coordinator. First time he's being a coordinator in I don't even know how many years.
A lot, right? A lot of years, probably since before he became the head coach at Oregon. So like 2008, probably something like that. I'm not.
Mike Bellotti would have been the head coach at that point, I guess.
Yeah, because they did a handover at some point, and it always surprised me how short a time that Chip Kelly was actually the head coach at Oregon. He was only there for like 4 years. It feels like it was forever, but we live in an accelerated age now. I really like this hire because I think that what Chip Kelly does is he kind of completes Ryan Day offensively. Ryan Day, one of the best passing game schemers that we have in college football, right? Like the stuff that he does is kind of silly. I did feel like they started to get a little stale in the run game. They were doing a lot of just inside zone up the middle, and it was very predictable. This is not going to be Chip Kelly. People remember him for some of the power, read stuff. That's kind of out now. Like he ran a lot of true power concepts during his time at UCLA. They were a much heavier team. They were a much more, they had 2 tight ends at times. And I think that he did that because he saw the way that defenses were moving. We go from this moment where it's a zag to have fast players out in space, and now it's a zag to have physical players going against these defenders who are out in space. And I think that that's going to be a huge addition for them in trying to diversify their run schemes. I'm fascinated to see where he lands, especially since he has 2 running backs in Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson who are so different and have kind of give you the whole gamut of options potentially as a run game schemer. So I do really like this. Like you said, I imagine, maybe in January, Chip Kelly's like, well, maybe it is the greatest thing for me to leave a head coaching job. And maybe by February, he's like, screw it. I can be.
I'm ready to get out.
And if you're Ohio State, you're like, well, we just hired one guy and he left. We can't mess this up again, right? We have to get this right. It's too important this season. And maybe he just gets kind of a Godfather offer that's just like, well, you know what? Let's start from scratch again.
And then also for Chip Kelly, in February when he's starting to come on, then you're looking and seeing like, well, look at all these playmakers I have. Look what all I got. Like I'm not walking into a bare closet. Like I'm gonna think of all the play designs. I just looked it up because I wanted to confirm, but 2007 when Michigan and Oregon played, he was the offensive coordinator for the Statue of Liberty play. So watch out, Statue of Liberty in week 14 it is this year. Never know. You see Will Howard run the Statue of Liberty play for a touchdown. I'm fully ready for it, and I will lose it if that happens.
The most famous monument in Columbus, Ohio, the Statue of Liberty.
The Statue of Liberty of Will Howard.
I want to say, before you move on from Ohio State, sorry, Jake, I want to say one more thing. Who won the first 4-team college football playoff?
That would be Ohio State University.
Would it not be just
over what? Why am I Herzlick?
Oregon.
Was it
Marcus Mariota.
Why am I blanking on the? Because Mark Herzlick was the linebacker out of Boston College.
Oh! I'm forgetting the name to the Oregon head coach.
And not important.
Yeah.
Mark Helfrich.
Yes, that
one.
Go.
Yeah,
Helfrich.
I was like, I don't. Are you thinking quarterback? And then you said linebacker.
No, quarterback. No, my bad. Anyways,
we're in the parking lot. I wouldn't doubt to see Ohio State win it all this year. Maybe the
James
first
Franklin
team.
Feels like if he doesn't make the playoff this year, that fan base is just going to lose it on him because he gets so close every year for the most part. He had a little dip there in 2020, 2021. Didn't have the best in there. Sean Clifford really struggled. Under Trace McSorley, they couldn't have gotten any closer to the playoff if they tried. The last couple of years, it just feels like they have gotten so close that their fan base needs this. And now that it's expanded to 12 teams, it almost feels like there's not a reason for him to make it. I know they lost a bunch of players on defense, but they've got, if Judkins and Henderson are the best running back duo in the country, Singleton and Allen are probably right there as well, because Singleton and Allen both have explosive abilities. They haven't seemed like they played their potential in every game. It seems like they both have moments and they're still kind of putting it together. Drew Aller is supposed to be the savior at quarterback. He played well at times last year, but then in big games, he struggled. Against Ohio State, he finished less than 50%. Michigan, he struggled as well. New offensive coordinator, Adi Kolonicki, and then Tom Allen comes in on the defensive side.
Huge hire.
It feels like if Ohio State pushed their chips the whole way in, Penn State looked at it and said, okay, we're all in too. What do you think about that, Shehan?
Well, there's two pieces to what you just asked. And one is, well, if they don't make the playoffs, like, are Penn State fans going to freak? I don't know that they have the ability to change anything if they wanted to. Like James Franklin got a first Jimbo contract. He has like $50 million left on his contract. And the other piece that you start asking is like, okay, well, where do we go? Like what do we do next if we decide to shell out $50 million to fire James Franklin, who, by the way, like would probably win 9 games in this nightmare scenario. So I don't necessarily think that there's like any scenario really there for them to decide to move on from him. I think it's more likely that he tries to find something different than it is that they move on from him. But I think the other piece of this too is that I've said this about Ole Miss as well. Penn State is the reason that they made the college football playoff. They made it specifically for this team that clearly is not as good as Ohio State, clearly is not as good as Michigan of the past few years. And being third in the Big Ten wasn't really that good of a consolation prize. Well, now you got a pretty good consolation prize. You're probably going to host a playoff game if you're the third best team in the Big Ten. And look, I do think there's going to be a race for that third team. Obviously Ohio State I have as my 1, Oregon I have as my 2. I think Penn State has a really good chance to be 3 if Michigan is kind of like inconsistent, like I think they might be, which I might be wrong on that. But Penn State, I mean, you look at their schedule, they get Ohio State at home, they go to USC, and the rest of it's kind of mid, honestly. Like there's not a lot that scares you. I just think that you look, and I've described Penn State before too as like the Mendoza line of the Big Ten, where like if you're above them, you're probably great, and if you're below them, you're probably not that good. And they've got a lot of teams that I view as being below the Mendoza line this year, right? So they play Illinois, UCLA, at Wisconsin. That'll be kind of interesting, but I don't think that Wisconsin can beat them necessarily with the way that they play in the trenches. Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota versus Maryland. Like they should win all of those games without much issue. So I look at this team. I mean, certainly they have a floor that's below it, but there's really no excuse not to be at least a 10-2 team in 2024, and that clearly, in my opinion, gets you into the college football playoffs. So I don't even know that says a whole lot of amazing things about elevating the program or anything like that. I just think that the way that things kind of work out in this conference, I just think that they have a very good chance to be that third team. And you mentioned some of the additions that they made, right? Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas. If you loved Kansas's offense, this is the guy who made it happen. I'm curious how he works with that whole Sean Clifford thing, because Sean Clifford is not the same kind of quarterback as Jalen Daniels. Oh my gosh, yeah, Drew Aller.
Sean Clifford just played for 9 years. It's fine.
They all run together. Trace McSorley, same one. But I think that Drew Aller, right? He is not a mobile quarterback in the vein of the ones that Andy Kotelnicki has had success with. You look at a Tyree Jackson at Buffalo. You look at Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean at Kansas. So they're going to have to make adjustments to work with a more pro-style quarterback, but Andy Kotelnicki is also a master of misdirection, and he can do that in the passing game as well. So I want to see them try to make the game easier for Drew Aller. It felt so difficult at times last season. And if they can do that, I mean, again, give yourself a chance. Just be a 10-2 team heading into the playoff and give yourself a chance to win a game or two. And I think that they are very much in position to do that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is the best thing going for Drew Aller this year is that this is his second. He's had a full year under his belt now. People forget he was a true freshman last year. Yes, he was a 5-star. He was on. Oh, he was redshirt. You're right. But he was a freshman last year.
Yeah,
Was he
first time really playing.
Yeah, it was
first time having the job.
Yes.
Thank you, Jake. And that's tough. And then you're going against the likes of Ohio State. You know, you're playing against big time teams. But it's not like Penn State's offense was awful. I mean, if you look at their total offense, they're ranked one spot behind Florida State, which if you would have asked anybody, people would have thought Florida State was at least a top 20 offense last year. And Penn State's right there with them. So the best thing they can do is, like you said, Jake, you alluded to it earlier, the two running backs in Singleton and Allen. If you have a good running game, that's going to save the life of your quarterback. And then now they've added to the wide receiver core. They bring in the offensive coordinator from Kansas, like you said, Shehan. I love him. And then Tom Allen, Penn State's calling card is their defense. They will have a good defense every single year. I mean, it's plug and play with that defense coordinator. They're just going to have a good defense, in my opinion. And Tom Allen is a guy, he's a really good coach. I mean, he made Indiana decent, which when is the last time that's happened? So I think Penn State can make the college football playoff. I think the one thing that works against them, I agree. I have them in third in the Big Ten. I think the one thing that works against them is how many SEC teams get in, how many ACC teams get in. You know, they're going to be on the cusp again, on the bubble again, and that is just irony at its most beautiful form. Beautiful form is like you're saying that they make the college football playoff extended for Penn State, and Penn State just misses it again. But anyway, I'm higher on Penn State this year than I was last year.
And I'll say, right, when you look at the distribution of teams in the college football playoff, in my opinion, just year to year, I think the Big Ten is a lock to get 3. Like, I think that 3 is what they're guaranteed. I think that 4th might be a little bit of a swing. The SEC to me is guaranteed 4 essentially every single year with the level of competition that they've got right now. But being 3rd to me still pretty comfortably gets you in. I think that being 2nd or 3rd in the Big Ten probably makes you higher priority most years than the Big 12 runner-up or the ACC runner-up. I'd say, certainly Notre Dame will throw a little bit of a wrench into that as well. The one other thing about this team is, and again, hopefully Andy Kotelnicki can bring it. They have to. Well, actually, let me go back and put it like this. Last year, they called their offense scared. Like Mike Yurcich coached scared on offense. It was always, how can we avoid putting Drew Aller in any high leverage situation? I think that he finished with like a 19-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And while it's good to have a good one, this was actually a huge negative to me. They'd never let him put the ball in harm's way because they were afraid. And
they never threw 50-50 balls. They never pushed it down the field. Everything was short. Yeah. Everything was fast. They never actually let him go for it.
I'd rather him throw. I mean, 10's a lot, but I'd rather him throw 10 interceptions if he gets 30 touchdowns out of it, right?
Because then the ball's getting pushed down the field. That's when picks happen. Is when the ball's going. And Ohio State was the biggest highlight of that last year. Is when they refused to throw the ball down the field.
Yeah, and I think that it just hamstrings the way that you play. And one thing I'm going to be very curious about, and by the way, it was a 25-2 touchdown to interception ratio, which I don't think that was a positive thing for this team last year. I think that one question that I've long had is how much of this is James Franklin saying we're going to coach and call our game like this. We are going to play conservative because we don't want to put the defense in bad situations. Because if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter who the offensive coordinator is. I do think that Andy Kotelnicki would not have come without some assurance that he's going to get to run this thing, right? He was very, very, very happy at Kansas. He had opportunities before. Lance Leipold fought hard to keep him, but I mean, he became a $1.9 million assistant, if I remember right. So, things happen at a certain point. But I think that for me, I just need to see them trying to drive the ball down the field. I mean, I'm looking at his box scores right now. He averaged 3.2 yards per pass attempt against Michigan. How is that? That's not a. Those are
4.5 against Ohio State, and he was 18 of 42.
Brutal.
You're essentially running the football. You're running the football at that point. You're not passing.
The Ohio State Penn State game, for instance, it was 10-6 at halftime. And Nick Singleton had a total of 9 rushes. Katron Allen had a total of 9 rushes. There was never a point where they were so far behind that they had to throw the ball. It was 10-6 entering the fourth quarter. So them throwing the ball like that, it almost felt like you said, like they were playing scared. They didn't trust, their offensive line to actually open the hole. So they're like, well, let's just, throw it out in space and hopefully, Keandre Lambert-Smith can make a play, or hopefully, Theo Johnson can make a play, and relying on somebody to do something miraculous rather than like setting up your offense or taking a risky chance. Against Ohio State, they got a muff punt, basically went off the gunner's leg. They started at midfield and they proceeded to not even get a first down and punt. If there's a chance to suddenly like, okay, let's go for it, we got some momentum, here you go. Because then if you throw an interception, you already just punted, and then you throw an interception deep, at least instead of starting at midfield, they're starting inside their own 10.
And I'll tell you what, they play against West Virginia to open the year. I don't think that West Virginia can hang in the trenches with them. I think
don't
West
tell the internet people. Internet says that West Virginia is being by 2
touchdowns. I'm a Big 12 guy.
Fan.
I'm a Big 12 guy by background. Trust me, I've heard a thing or two. And I was very wrong about West Virginia last year. So if I'm wrong about this, certainly I'll hear about it. But look, the thing that I would love to see coming out of that game, and this is like, if this happens, like, at me on Twitter, because like I really would be encouraged by this.
You heard it here.
I'd love to see a highlight of Drew Aller throwing the most crazy boneheaded interception early in that game, because he's trying to do something. I'd love to just see, like, oh, he threw the ball 35 yards downfield, complete miscommunication with his receiver, and it was intercepted. Like I'd love to see a play like that where he's just trying something, because then he can also learn, okay, that was dumb. Now let's get back to work, right? I don't feel like he ever had an opportunity to do that last year.
Right. You don't get your fifth start throwing mesh routes. You don't.
Yeah. Well, I think Penn State, like you said, this is, it was made for them. If there's a chance, like, this is the year to do it, because almost certainly Aller is going to be looking at the NFL. Singleton and Allen are likely to be looking at the NFL. They've got a very senior, experienced receiver in Julian Fleming. Abdul Carter should be a pretty good player coming off the edge. They've got playmakers on both sides of the ball. So we'll see what happens. Want to dive into some of these middle of the road teams, the below the Mendoza line teams. One team that I think could be interesting this year is Rutgers, because Greg Schiano, I don't know what it is about Rutgers and why him with Rutgers just seems to click. Took them to a bowl game last year. They beat Miami. Their schedule lines up pretty well. Am I crazy for thinking that, like, Rutgers could, be going to back-to-back bowl games this year?
Oh, absolutely not. This is a team that should expect to make a bowl game with this schedule. Like, it is one of the easier schedules, frankly, in college football. It's like, we talked about this a little bit on our podcast, the College Football Survivor Show, earlier, because my co-host picked them as the darkest of dark horses to contend for the college football playoff. And I'm like, all right, sure. I'm not going that crazy, but
I'll have what you're having. Pour me a double.
But like, their schedule is so manageable. It really is. Like, they will be favored in probably 8 or 9 games. And they have a defense that's come along in a great way the past couple of years. Offensively, they've got one of the better returning running backs in the Big Ten, and Kyle Monagai, right? And
he doesn't get enough love for the Big Ten because there's so many good running backs.
Right.
You look at Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. When you start looking around the rest of it, because he's at Rutgers, he just doesn't get enough love.
Right.
He rushed for 1,200 yards last year.
Yeah, and these are not easy yards, right?
No.
Whenever you're having to work through some of the stuff that they did. I actually looked up to counter my co-host on the podcast. Their last 2,000 yard passer was in 2015. They haven't had a 2,000 yard passer since then. That's how bad it's been.
Okay.
And so they bring in Athan Kaliakmanis, who is frankly terrible at Minnesota, but it's one of those things where you wonder if just a change in scenery and a change in system can maybe do a guy some good, because he very quickly beat out their incumbent quarterback, Gavin Wimsatt, who was not a bad player necessarily. And so you kind of wonder, can they get just a little bit more consistency throwing the ball to go alongside a fantastic running game, to go alongside, by the way, a really, really good defense that actually has like a lot of potential NFL talent if some things work out right for them? Like, sure. I mean, I think they should not just expect to be in a bowl game, but they should expect to have a winning season this year. I'm not going to, I'm not going to declare them as being, a 9 or 10 win team, certainly, but this schedule is a gift. I mean, when you look at the schedules that they've had to play being in the Big Ten East over the past couple of years, they have been screwed just over and over again. But like frankly, again, they should be favored in 7 or 8 games this year, and I think it would be a huge deal for them. By the way, and they've recruited at a high level in the class of 24 and 25. Like I think that they're kind of, I don't want to. There's a ceiling on what you can build at Rutgers, certainly, but in that context, I think they're really building something.
I don't know. Piscataway is a destination place. I don't know.
Yeah, New York's college football team.
Yeah, the whole reason they are in the Big Ten. But Rutgers and Maryland, to me, are 2 of the biggest teams, and maybe Michigan State in there as well, that are benefiting from the lack of divisions now in the Big Ten. Because every year, those teams were having to play Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. And if you were being honest, your goal was maybe beat one of them. And that's you needed a down year. You needed Michigan to be on a down year. You needed Penn State to be on a down year. Ohio State really didn't go on a down year in that 10-year span. Michigan State, even going through there at one point, was an incredibly tough team. In those mid-teens, Michigan State with Mark Antonio was winning 8, 9, 10 games. So Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana really never had a chance. But now Rutgers, it's almost like the schedule makers gave them a break. It's like, you know what? For the last 10 years, you've gotten your hearts beat out. We're going to do this a little easier. We're not going to give you any of those teams. We're going to make it a little easier on you guys. So Greg Schiano just seems like he's happy. He's at home. I don't ever expect him to leave again. There's no reason to leave again. He's king in Piscataway.
Where's he going to go?
If Tennessee fires another coach, maybe they'll call him again.
Please do not open that gateway into my mentions again. But no, I mean, I think it's just a good fit, right? The thing I'm going to be, this is like a little bit of an aside. The thing that I'm going to be fascinated by is how Rutgers continues to compete with Fran Brown going to Syracuse, because that dude is like the king of the Northeast. That dude recruits New Jersey as well as anybody. So like there will be legitimate battles between Rutgers and Syracuse for meaningful players in the Northeast and in New Jersey. But I think that one, I mean, you can sell the Big Ten if you're Rutgers, and 2, like Greg Schiano's as mobbed up as anybody in that region. So it'll be that'll be like a little side quest for people to keep an eye on over the next 3 to 5 years.
I went to Temple and I was in college right when Fran Brown was there with Matt Rule and
my Baylor guy.
Yeah. So we were talking about this on the ACC when we had Eric McLean on here and talking about Fran Brown because we like my college buddies, whatnot, we all wanted Fran Brown to be the head coach. Wanted him to be the head coach because after it's like, well, he's a Philly guy. He's got that area. He's going to lock it in recruiting. He's maybe too young right now. Then, of course, goes to Georgia, becomes a great defensive back coach. And, he's going to light it up at – And
I really like Stan Drayton, but they fumbled that bag. Fran Brown should be the head coach at Temple right now.
They screwed it up when they hired Rod Carey. Rod Carey never should have been hired there. That was a bad one. And it should have just been Fran Brown at that point and just taking your risk because you took a risk on Rod Carey. But Fran Brown, I mean, look what he did. He went and got Kyle McCord from Ohio State, had that relationship because he was in Philadelphia, knew everything about it. They knew each other for a long time. So that is going to be a very interesting one because they're not super far apart. They're going to recruit probably about the same caliber of players. They're going to be recruiting the same territories. And we'll see who comes out on top. Obviously, Schiano's been there a while, but Fran Brown is young, energetic, guys like that. It's a different personality. And, playing at Syracuse, it's, you're also in the city there. Syracuse has some legends there. So it's not like it's never been good before. They've got plenty of times where they've done it, but I'll be interested as well in there. William, I think you were going to say something about Rutgers. Were you?
Yeah, no. And talking about the New Jersey area. So I did an article, I think last year on where all the top talent in high school came from per capita versus, just overall. And New Jersey's in the top 10. They're not slack. They're at least in the top 15, but I'm pretty sure top 10 if I remember correctly. So like that's a hotbed of talent. And then what's right next to New Jersey is Pennsylvania. So if you can convince a guy or two not to go to Penn State and to come over to Rutgers, I mean, yeah, you have an opportunity to be, again, the ceiling I think is 10 wins. I think that's the best they can do because you're not going to consistently beat Penn State. You're not going to consistently beat Ohio State in that area. And now, like y'all said with Fran Brown, which another sidebar, y'all came here to listen to the Big Ten, and you got some Temple talk. Where else can you get that?
I try to slide it in as often as we can. We got to talk about it. We got to build the brand up.
We're
down big right now.
There was that overlap with my Matt Rule guys coming through Baylor and all of that. Like I would have planned for this a little better, but
it happens naturally. You can't avoid Temple talk.
It happens naturally.
We try to slide it in as often as possible.
No, but I think I think that, Shiano's definitely doing something that I think is sustainable there. I think that probably the ceiling with consistency is more like 8 wins, but if they can be a team that's in a bowl every single year, and I mean, the other piece of this too is that, and we joked before the show that we were not going to go long on Rutgers. Of course, now we're going long on Rutgers, but I think the goal too, like, you just have to be good enough to pull an upset. They haven't been good enough to be competitive for actual legitimate upsets that can impact the college football playoff. Really, since
they gave Ohio State a run for a while last year, though. They started to look like they would be able to start doing that.
100%. So ruin somebody's season, and just one last thing on the New Jersey front, like, Michigan has made hay in the state of New Jersey under Jim Harbaugh. Like, that's been a huge part of their recruiting strategy. I know Rashawn Gary is kind of the headlining guy that came out of New Jersey, and Paramus Catholic over there, right? Like, they produce so much NFL talent. I think, I don't think you're ever going to lock down that state for various reasons, but you don't have to lock it down to still get some really good players.
Yeah, and we've actually seen it a little bit more lately. I believe Rutgers actually flipped a player from Penn State earlier this year. Don't know all the details, don't know what coaches said behind the story, but the fact is, you can say, hey, we flipped a player from Penn State. I'm looking at this past year's rankings, the 2024. The top 2 players went to Georgia. I'm sorry, you're not going to compete with them. But number 3 and number 4 go to Rutgers. Number 5 goes to Penn State. Number 6 goes to Michigan. Number 7 goes to Ohio State. Those 3 programs are going to be incredibly tough to beat. If you can figure out a way eventually to do it, that's great. But getting the number 3 and number 4 player in the state to go to Rutgers, I'm sure they had offers to go elsewhere. So being able to keep that talent home is great. Want to jump over to basically their counterpart, Maryland. I'm not really sure what to make of Maryland this year. I mean, Talia was there or Talio, however you say his name, was there forever, was like on the Sean Clifford path, just like would never leave, even was trying to figure out a way to come back one more time after he was clearly out of eligibility.
I forgot about that.
Because he played a couple snaps and he said he shouldn't have. I don't know. It didn't matter. He wasn't coming back. But now MJ Morris comes over after he basically pulled himself out of NC State and was like, hey, I'm going to transfer. And I don't want you to play me anymore because I want to keep my eligibility. I thought MJ Morris was pretty good at NC State last year, but a whole different team, whole different system. They don't have as good of playmakers, at least on paper, what it seems like this year. So Mike Locksley seems like he's been on a little bit on the up. The last couple of years, they've started off pretty well, and then they just play one game and it's just, like, the season collapses. Is that something you think we're going to see this year, Shehan?
I don't know if they're going to be good enough to have a collapse. I think that this is a true sort of reloading year. And, we mentioned, of course, in recruiting what Greg Schiano's done in Maryland. In New Jersey. Well, Maryland has done that in Maryland, of course, in the DMV with Mike Locksley. And so I don't think this is going to be like a descent. I just think that MJ Morris is such a young quarterback. Like you said, he showed some stuff during his time at NC State, but he is not a finished product. That's part of the reason he wanted to redshirt the rest of last year. He didn't want to burn that full year of eligibility on what he felt was a setup year in a lot of ways. And I do think that Mike Locksley has done a great job of surrounding his roster with weapons. And so I do think that long term, I mean, this is a tremendous get in MJ Morris, who can be the quarterback of this program for 3 or 4 years. I just think that the first year might be just a little rocky.
Yeah, and I'll say my biggest negative on Maryland to add, so they added weapons around them, and they had 4 offensive linemen out of the transfer portal. And that sounds great, looks good on paper, but the hardest thing about offensive line is camaraderie and playing together as a unit. And 4 of these, I guess all 5 of them have never played with each other before. So you're learning each other, you're learning your quirks. And people don't think about that, but there's a lot of communication that goes on with the big boys down there. It's not all about just eating food and pushing big bodies around. You got to be able to communicate and think too. And you have to know what each other are good at. Like when you're doing double team blocks, if you're running the zone scheme, you got to know where your guy's hip's going to be. So I'm curious to see if these 5 guys can come together. I keep saying 4 because 4 transferred in. They had 1 that stayed in Kyle Long. But I'm curious to see if these guys can come together as a unit and give MJ Morris time to throw the football, because that's tough. That is really tough to replace your entire offensive line.
So there's two programs that got new head coaches between Indiana and Michigan State. Indiana obviously fires Tom Allen. Michigan State, whole debacle with Mel Tucker, ends up going with Jonathan Smith. Shehan, who do you think has a better year between Michigan State and Indiana?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, first of all, I love both of these hires. I think that these are two of the most right hires that could have been made, frankly, at this time. Jonathan Smith is the type of coach who I think is going to be around this program for 10 or 15 years and potentially completely transform it. He reminds me, it's a different kind of way than Mark D'Antonio, but it reminds me, I think, of just a sort of slow build, being a little bit more comfortable in some ways, not being the main character in town, right? You've got Tom Izzo, you've got Michigan right down the road. And so I really do like that hire. And the reason that I'm going to go with them over Indiana is I think that Aiden Childs just gives you a little something at quarterback. And of course, Indiana does bring in Curtis Rourke, a really, really good player from Ohio. But I think that Aiden Childs is just a playmaker. And when I look at this roster too, it's not as far gone, in my opinion, as Indiana's is. I think that you can sort of pull together some stuff, pick up some pieces. And, again, it was just so... I don't even want to say mismanaged, but it was put in such bad positions by Mel Tucker and by the interim coaching staff over the past couple of years. This is a situation where I think you bring in a true ball coach who knows how to get guys into good positions, who knows how to build a team culture and a roster that makes sense. And with a playmaker like Aiden Childs, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a team that makes the bowl game and potentially finishes in range with a winning record. I don't think they're as far gone as it looks. Again, I mean, for whatever you want to say about the struggles that Mel Tucker had over the past couple of years, he could recruit at a pretty high level and brought in a good amount of talent. They added another really good transfer class as well. So to me, Michigan State is that team who I think has a chance to bounce up. I love the Curt Cignetti hire long-term at Indiana, and I do think they will be noticeably improved in 2024. But I think that if I have to pick one, I'm going with Michigan State.
Well, and to add to the recruiting trail thing, Jonathan Smith made Oregon State nationally relevant. And you do that by recruiting. And he was beating Oregon. He was beating Washington. He was getting some of the scraps here and there, but you don't get a 5-star in Aiden Childs because you can't recruit. I mean, this guy knows how to get into people's houses and get them to come to Michigan State now. And got them to go to Oregon State when Oregon State was a joke. I mean, which Michigan State seems to be in that same realm right now with everything circling around them. So I will have to disagree with you, though, because I love Curt Cignetti and I love Curtis Rourke, the Maple Missile out of Ohio. And I think he tore his ACL early in the year last year. And I think had he not done that, I think he's at a much bigger program. I think we hear him in the lights. I think he has an opportunity to go to Ohio State. I think he had an opportunity to go to a bigger school had he not gotten hurt. But the one big question mark, like you said, with Indiana is we're going to find out how good JMU really was last year, because essentially JMU just moved over to Indiana and they're about to play. I think Elijah Surratt, Tyler Stevens, Zach Horton, the tight end, a receiver, and an offensive lineman both come in on the offensive side of the ball. I hadn't even looked at all the defensive side of the ball, guys. But JMU was undefeated most of the year last year. They weren't a bad team, but you're playing group of five football. You're not doing that anymore in Indiana. However, I do like what they have, what they're going to be building. And I think this is going to be a year where Indiana might struggle out of the gate, but they ended up being a bowl team. And I think they play upset to a couple teams this year. So I'm more high for some reason on Indiana this year. And I think it's just because I have a man crush on Curtis Rourke. I just love watching him play football.
I don't know, though. Is he even better than Nathan? Is he even the best Rourke?
I don't know. We're going to find out this year.
One thing about Curt Cignetti is he's just a winner. He has never had a losing record as a head coach, going his whole way back to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, back, Division II. He has just won. And JMU, goes there, wins, has them on the verge of going to a New Year's Six bowl game. And Indiana, I think this is a phenomenal hire. He starts it off by saying that they're going to make the Big Ten championship in
Go beat Ohio State, baby.
Calls out Ohio State, who's just over there sitting there eating their popcorn. And it was that meme of like, you're talking to me? So I think this is a great hire long-term, like you said. Curtis Rourke, great player. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do it this year. They do get a lot of games at home. There's definitely some excitement with the program bringing a guy like Cignetti in. But I'm with you there, Shehan. I think Aiden Childs is just a better overall playmaker where he can go out there and win an extra game or two for them. Curtis Rourke is consistent. I'm just not sure that what they have there is going to be enough to get them into a bowl game. It wouldn't shock me if they find their way into a bowl game because their non-conference games against FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte should be 3 wins. UCLA is not going to be very good. Then do they beat a Washington team who's just completely depleted? We have no idea what they are. Do they beat Purdue? Do they beat Michigan State? There's easily 6 games they could win on this schedule, but can they put it all together in the first year for a new head coach? So I think it's a pretty even comparison to see if either of them make a bowl game, though.
Don't sleep on Biff Poggi over there in Charlotte now. Yeah, that's not an easy.
I hope
win.
he wears a cutoff during the game.
Oh, he will. He absolutely will. 100%. I will say we got in our Rutgers talk. I do have to say, Kurt Cignetti, you mentioned that stat that he's never had a losing season. He's never been as disadvantaged as he is going to be at Indiana, right? You go from IUP, which is a pretty good D2 program, to I did want to make, Elon, pretty impressive job he did there, but also started to slip a little bit. That's when he got out, and JMU has been the class of the CAA and then became the class of the Sun Belt the last 2 years. So it's going to be a different kind of build, I think, at Indiana than it was at the other Indiana University of Pennsylvania. But I still am very excited about what he can do long term.
Is Northwestern going to be handicapped by playing in a 10,000 person stadium or how many players are going to run into walls at Wrigley Field? I'll never forget when they all had to go one way because there was not enough room in Wrigley Field for however they did it, where they said, oh yeah, all the offense has to go one way. The only way you can score the other way is by a interception or a blocked kick.
Is Steve Bartman allowed to go to a Northwestern game? The famous Cubs fan.
I hope so. Yeah, I feel like he should be allowed. It's not the same sport.
It's different,
you're playing
right?
Football. No, but realistically, do you think that has an impact? Like this having a weird stadium, they surprised people. David Braun, surprised people. Everybody thought that they were going to win one game. It was not a good roster, and it was in a really rough shape after Pat Fitzgerald left. And then, sure enough, he proved everybody wrong, and they had a pretty solid season. And I feel like we're going to see the same thing again. That David Braun is probably not going to be at the class of the Big Ten, not going to be at the top. But I don't think they're going to be an embarrassment. I don't think they're going to be an easy game for anybody. Am I on the right page for that? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that you like, and maybe the one small way that the stadium situation impacts them, is where you advantage yourself by not being a passing team and being on the lake, right? Like you're going to be right in that wind tunnel most likely, and this is an offense that's going to be coordinated by Zach Lujan, the former South Dakota State offensive coordinator, who I think probably will lean heavy on the run. So maybe you get somebody because they bring in their high-powered passing game and the ball does not go where they expect it to go. But that's maybe the only way that I can see it impacting things. This is, I think, going to be an interesting spot for this program after so much success in the first year. Like, it's a lot of expectation, I feel like, that they're coming in with, just after winning 7 games last season. So I'm a little mixed on that, I'd say, but again, you have to trust that coaching staff as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they proved enough to make it so you don't think that they're automatically going to be a 1 or 2 win team. Last year everybody assumed that they were left for dead, and then they went out and had a winning record, which if anybody had told me that back in August last year, I would have called them insane. I would have called them crazy. And then sure enough, they were competitive in, almost most games. I mean, they definitely lost a couple games by a decent margin, but beating Wisconsin, that's not an easy feat. You beat Luke Fickell on the road, or they beat in Camp Randall last year. So Last two teams to talk about before we get into there is really just Illinois and Purdue. The interesting part about here is, Ryan Walters obviously used to be the defensive coordinator at Illinois under Brett Bielema. They play each other this year. Does the mentor beat the head coach, or mentee? Does the mentee beat the mentor, or does the mentor stay on top?
Yeah, the master beat the apprentice. I feel like
there you go. That one.
The easier way to do.
Yeah, couldn't get there.
No, but it's more because I just don't think that Purdue has figured itself out at all, right? I mean, they've got a couple of players that I really like. Hudson Card at quarterback. Dylan Thieneman is one of the best safeties in college football that nobody talks about. And once you get outside of those guys, like, I don't know, man. Like, they didn't figure things out offensively last year under offense coordinator Graham Harrell. Defensively, right, they know the playmakers that they have, but there was no consistency there, especially when you look at that front group. And I just think that Illinois is in a much further position as a program at this point than Purdue is. And, they've built up, of course, those trenches in so many ways like Bielema teams do. I expect them to continue to run the ball at a high level. I'm going to be fascinated to see a little more from Luke Altmaier at quarterback as well. This is his second year as a starting quarterback. I just don't know at this point what Purdue is going to do better than Illinois, unless some people make some huge steps.
I got an idea. What if Graham Harrell comes out of the booth and plays quarterback again? Does he have any eligibility left?
Well, actually, I don't think the problem is quarterback, but two, fun fact, Hudson Card, the quarterback for Purdue, did actually start his career by playing wide receiver at at Lake Travis High School before he eventually moved over to quarterback. So if it gets me another weapon outside in Hudson Card, maybe that's something that I can work with.
Yeah, there you go.
Not a bad thought there. So we went through every team here. So in the Eastern half, I think we can all agree Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State are the legitimate playoff contenders. When you add everybody in, Oregon is obviously a very clear playoff contender in there as well. Shehan, do you think anybody other than those four teams have a legitimate shot at the college football playoff this year?
It's a good question. So I do think so like you mentioned, those four, I think that some of it has to do with path. Some of it has to do with teams overperforming. The two that I'd reluctantly bring in as potential teams that could backdoor their way into the conversation would be Iowa. I mean, you look at their schedule and it's like, I don't know how they did this. I don't know how they kept doing this, but defensively, we know what they are. If they're not literally the worst offense in like the last 5 years in college football, which they might be, I don't know. Who knows at this point with this team? But if they're not, by the way, they bring back Cade McNamara at quarterback. They bring back tight end Luke Lachey, who was their best offensive player before he got hurt last year. It wasn't supposed to be. He was
like the fifth leading receiver, and he played 3 games.
Right. He was not supposed to, or this offense was not supposed to be as bad as it ended up being. They were equally unlucky as they were bad, and they were also bad. But if the offensive coordinator change makes any difference, I think that, they have enough defensively to potentially keep themselves in game and get maybe to that 9 or 10 win plateau. And again, I think that's enough to give you a chance in the Big Ten. My sort of like crazy, I'm looking a little side eye at this team, and I don't know if anybody else kind of believes that I have anything going on, is like, what if USC just like kind of sold itself?
I was hoping you were going to say Nebraska.
I was waiting for it.
I was so ready for you to say Nebraska.
Yeah, I did have a lot of Matt Rule talk. I guess I see how that could have happened.
I was like ready for it, and Dylan Raiola is going to do it because they might start 7-0. I was ready for it, but okay, USC, keep going.
That's probably a much more interesting one to pick. Do that in 2025. Call me back next year, and I'll make sure to do that. Which I am excited about Nebraska. You guys obviously talked about it last week. So, like, what I'm curious about, and I was at Baylor in the mid-2010s, right? So I know how they ran practices. And the way that they ran practices were all about how can we make our offense the best that it can be. Well, USC under Lincoln Riley has had some of those same issues where they're constantly like they're not playing physical in practice. They're not tackling to the ground in practice, stuff like that, because they want to practice offense. That's all they really do. I'm curious now. They bring in a head coach of the defense in Matt Entz, who comes from the North Dakota State system. They hire a defensive coordinator in D'Anton Lynn, who was tremendous last year at UCLA. They bring in Aaron Donald's defensive line coach from the Los Angeles Rams and Eric Henderson. But I think that the thing that might be most interesting is they bring in a quarterback in Miller Moss who just isn't going to save you. Like, you've got to figure some stuff out, right? And so I wonder if this ends up being a blessing in disguise for them to just say, we're going to have to play complementary football because we don't necessarily have the horses to get away with not playing complementary football. And if that makes them a more predictable team, I don't know that I can get all the way there with them for me, but this is Lincoln Riley's stock has never been lower. And like, maybe I even include when he was the offensive coordinator at East Carolina, like it has never been lower. But this is a coaching staff and a coach who's won 10 games every single year. And I believe 11 games up until last year, every year except the COVID season.
Yeah.
And I think that people are too quick to say, well, it's over. He's not going to figure it out, when I don't necessarily know that that's true. They played their first 4 games. They played both LSU, who's rebuilding a little bit, but really, really good, and Michigan, who's also rebuilding a little bit, but really, really good. If you find a way to win those games, right? If you find a way, because you have a more experienced team coming back than either of those two, then like suddenly everything kind of looks on the table for you. You still play Notre Dame, you still play a lot of tough games, but I think that gives you enough leeway to be a 10-2 team and give yourself a chance at the playoffs. So I don't know exactly how much I believe it, but I feel like there's a backdoor way for them to get in.
Shehan, I want to touch on one thing you said earlier about practice, and not to make this about Clemson, but to definitely make this about Clemson. So one of the biggest differences in how Lincoln Riley and Bob Stoops before ran that Oklahoma team is, like you said, they took the physicality out of practice. We played them in the Russell Athletic Bowl in 2014. We did a charity event, and I was speaking with some of the players, and they hadn't put on full pads at practice since October, the first week of October. And to put that in perspective, we did it twice a week, every week, and throughout bowl season. We ended up winning that game 40-6, and they could not handle the physicality of our game. Well, what is the Big Ten known for? It might be a stereotype, but what is the Big Ten known for?
Yeah, physicality, 100%.
And that's why I'm afraid that this shift from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten is going to hurt him more, because if he continues that practice, man, you cannot simulate the collisions that the offensive line and defensive line get if you don't put on full pads. You cannot simulate tackling if you do not have pads on, because there's one thing to thud someone up. They did a really good job of touching people last year. They couldn't tackle anybody. And I know they were in the bottom 100 of tackles per game and missed tackles per game. So if they don't change that, and you go up against Ohio State, you go up against Michigan, who's got a strong running back, you go up against LSU, who's probably going to run the football more this year than they did last year, it's not going to be good. So I am high on USC too, but I just wanted to put that caveat in there, because I think like, a lot of people were zigging and zagging, where a lot of teams, it's really common for teams nowadays to not hit during practice because you want your players to be safe. But how do you practice a collision sport without hitting each other? So that's my biggest qualm with how Lincoln Riley runs his program. I think everything else he does is pretty good, and I am high on USC as well. Higher, I would say. I think they're an 8-win team. I think they could sneak in the playoff if they win one of those LSU or Michigan games. I think they get a lot of hype around them.
No, and I think again, it's going to be how far can Lincoln Riley go without learning a lesson? And he learned, I think, half a lesson this past year, and ended up making a defensive coordinator change and ended up bringing in a lot of really, really good assistants. So now we got to see if he can learn the other half of the lesson and kind of revamp how he does things. They are, again, a very locked up type of program when it comes to access and being forthright, so I don't know that we're going to hear until maybe it's frankly too late whether they've made changes, but it's something I've got my eye on, and I can't wait to come back at the end of the season and be like, oh, they went 4-8 and got run all over.
Yeah, I'm mad he got rid of Alex Grinch because that took away a lot of. I'm going to miss the Alex Grinch tracker that Jake had last year.
I kept an Alex Grinch tracker of letting everybody know. Okay, over the course of his 7 years, his rushing defense has averaged 98th. His passing defense is 105th. How is this guy still employed? I can do just as bad.
I'm going to miss it.
The other thing is, if Miller Moss does struggle, they did bring in Jaden Maeva, who was pretty good last year at UNLV. Not that they're going to need to, but it feels like it's a break glass case of emergency that you do have a guy who has experience and was pretty good there last year.
Yeah, I'm big on him too. And shout out to Justin Kripe, who does our group of 5 guys for the Walk-On Redshirts, because he's going to love that I gave a lot of love to Curtis Rourke and Jalen.
Even if they're not group of 5 anymore. All right, let's do our walk-on teams of the year.
We can talk some Ricky White. You want to talk some more UNLV? I'm down.
We've done Temple. Let's do it.
Hey, I said that UNLV could possibly put up a fight with Boston College this year, and Eric McLean shut me down real fast. He's like, "We're not doing that. We are not doing that."
Talk UNLV and ACC football. We don't do it. We have to now, though. We're on the West Coast, all Coast Conference, baby.
Yeah, exactly. All right. William, who's your walk-on team of the year?
My walk-on team on the east side of the Big Ten is I alluded to earlier, Indiana. They have an easy schedule, 62nd in the country, second easiest in the Big Ten, only behind I believe it's Rutgers. And I love Kirk Cignetti. I love the passion and the energy he brings to that program. And yes, it was pretty ignorant for him to get up in front of everybody and talk about beating Ohio State. But at the same time, if I'm going to, why would I not want to play for somebody who thinks that way? Like, what is the point of playing football if you go into the stadium thinking, all right, we're going to lose this one, but let's just do our best? No, I want my head coach to be borderline stupid, thinking we're going to win every single football game. And I love that about Kirk Cignetti. And if he's going to he is the motivator track on College Football 25 Dynasty. He's fully upgraded on there. He's going to get those guys ready to play. So that's my dark horse to be a contender in the Big Ten.
Shehan, are you going to go as wild and say Indiana?
I'm not going to go Indiana. I might have thought about Rutgers, but I think that I'm going to go with Michigan State. Just again, I mentioned, of course, Aiden Shiles coming in. I don't think this roster is as broken as it looks, especially with some of the guys they've been able to land over the past 2 years or so. Now, I will say, right, because I made the comparison a little bit to Washington whenever Kalen DeBoer took over, and you bring in a ball coach with a roster that maybe isn't as bad as it looks. Well, the transfer portal has evolved since then, so they've lost a number of their top contributors to other programs. That does make things tougher, but they also brought in the number 12 transfer class in the country, including a number of players coming over from Oregon State, not just their quarterback, but Jack Velling, a really good tight end, is coming over as well. He's going to help make their life easier. And, defensively, they found guys. Like, they've done a good job of developing, and I'm curious to see now with Jonathan Smith coming in, can he help unlock some of these players who learned, especially in the secondary, for a year or two from Mel Tucker. So I think that they're a potential surprise team. I'll name them my walk-on team.
I am going to take Rutgers. I kind of alluded to it. We were talking about it, but that defense has improved over the last couple of years. They went from 32 points per game down to 21 points per game over 2 seasons, and they have an experienced defense there. Kyle Monangai is an incredibly underrated running back. If he was playing in a different conference or even on a better team or better brand, I would say, he would be getting a lot more love than he is. He rushed for over 1,200 yards, and like you said, they didn't even have a 2,000-yard passer, so other teams knew they were going to run the ball, and he still had 1,200 yards. They were not good at passing the ball. I think bringing in Minnesota's quarterback, who I cannot pronounce his name, Ethan K something.
Athan Kaliakmanis.
Yeah, that one.
Shehan's in mid-season form already.
Yeah, he's ready to go.
That's all.
Even if he was not great at quarterback last year, even if he didn't pass for a ton of yards, I think having a guy that's got a full year of starting experience does count for something rather than a brand new, never started. That does count for at least something because he's played against a lot of these teams. He's familiar against them. The schedule just lines up very well because they don't have Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State on the schedule at all, which is a blessing for them. They do have, a couple of tough road games at Nebraska, which we're not sure what they're going to be. They could be better than that, but they also could be fake good. Virginia Tech could be a pretty solid team in the ACC. They go to USC. It's a cross-country road trip. Go to Maryland, and Maryland could be a hit-or-miss team. And then your team, Michigan State, to end the year. Could they go 8-4 this year? I think that's fully reasonable to expect they could go 8-4. Do they get up to 10 wins? I don't see that happening. I think there's too much that could happen. But Washington is a team that I think Rutgers is going to beat them. I think there's a really good chance. They have them at home. Washington's replacing basically all 22 guys and even most of the backups. I think their offensive line is replacing everybody in the 2 deep, or 9 of the 10 in the 2 deep. Replacing that much alone, you would think that a team like Washington would beat Rutgers. Well, last year, yeah, they would have. Well, this year, completely different. I like what they've got. I think there's enough, players on this team to really get them to 8 or 9 wins. And I think we look back at the end of the year and don't be shocked if Rutgers is sitting there ranked, 19th or 20th at the end of the season at 8-4, 9-3. Because
I'm not going as far as saying that they're going to be ranked at 8-4. I think with that schedule too.
Have you seen the rankings in college football playoff?
With that schedule, they got
college football 25. College football 25.
well, okay. If we're going college football 25 ranked, they might be number 2 in the country. They might be number 2 in the country at 8-4. But
I had Oregon at 6-6 in the playoff.
No, they're no. Let's disabuse ourselves of them being ranked at 8.
Okay, maybe a little too bold. I was feeling it. I kept going.
Well, the thing that I will say is that it depends a lot on who their wins are, right? Like if they lose some games that maybe they shouldn't, but they beat Virginia Tech and USC, like okay, maybe. I don't think 8-4 gets you there, but maybe 9-3 gets you into the top 25 right there at the end. I think they'll probably lose those games, but at the same time, like to be an 8-4 team after what this program has been through, I mean, it's really solid, right? Like it's really impressive what they've been able to do over the past little bit. And so, no, I like the pick a lot. And the thing about especially the Big Ten, I'd say maybe more than any other conference in college football, is when you have a manageable schedule, you got to jump all over it, man. You got to take it and you got to make it a memorable year.
Fine, I'll take 9-4 with a bowl win and rank 24th.
Pop-Tart Bowl. They got to play in the Pop-Tart Bowl.
Because they won the
Greg Schiano, oh my gosh, Greg Schiano and this Pop-Tart Bowl. I'm trying to think whether he'd be completely joyless or get super into it, because I don't know which way he'd go with that.
It depends on what Pop-Tart is that comes out of the stage. If it's brown cinnamon sugar, just like most of America, he would be excited. But if it's something unfrosted, we're gonna get plain Greg Schiano.
So before we get off here, I do want to just get your pick. We didn't make the picks last week for who your 2 teams are in the Big Ten championship game. If you want to call out a winner, go for it. But at least who you think those 2 teams are that make the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, this one, unfortunately, is real boring. It's going to be Ohio State. It's going to be Oregon. It's going to be I'm picking Ohio State over Oregon. They do play on October 12th, so this will be a rematch spot. I think that there's a reasonable chance that they split these 2 games. So maybe Oregon gets the title game and maybe Ohio State gets the regular season game. It's kind of a little up in the air. But I do think that these 2 teams are just on a different level than everybody else. I don't see anybody else who, frankly, should be quality-wise close. Now, the schedule is going to matter a lot, right? Like a team, I don't necessarily think that Rutgers could get up there, but like could Iowa with a really easy schedule find a way to be 8-1? It's possible, certainly, but that's the way that they get knocked out of this, is like a backdoor team that misses just everybody on the schedule. These are the 2 best teams in the conference. Most likely I'll have them number 1 and number 3 in my preseason top 25, I'd imagine. So I think that they're on a collision course.
William, who you got?
So I had Ohio State, Oregon. But the Oregon is the revolving door, because Oregon has 29th strength of schedule this year. It's going to be really tough. It's the easy pick. If I want to be a little different, I really want to dip my toes in that Penn State realm. But I think I'm gonna go chalk with Ohio State, Oregon. But I would not doubt if Penn State or Iowa, like you said earlier, end up in that game. Iowa is my true dark horse of the Big Ten. They were my dark horse last week, my walk-on team, if you will. But I think regardless of who plays in, I think this is Ohio State's conference, and The Big Ten championship is going to be very, very sweet for Buckeye Nation after the last 3 years of having to watch Michigan State do what they, or not Michigan State, but Michigan do what they did to them. So Ohio State winning the conference.
All right, I got Nebraska and no
Rutgers.
Yeah, no, I thought I'm gonna go chalk with you guys. I think Oregon takes the matchup in the regular season just because the game is in Eugene. There's gonna be a lot of hype for that. I saw something come up the other day where tickets for that game are standing room only, and they're pushing $500 already. So there's hype for that game. It was supposed to be played a couple years ago, got canceled due to COVID. So I know Oregon fans. Yeah. So I know there's some hype for that game. So I think that game is going to go Oregon's way. I think the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, Ohio State fans tend to sell that thing out because it is only 3 hours from Columbus. That will feel more like a home game for Ohio State fans because Oregon fans are going to have to get on a flight. They're basically going to have a home game there, and I think that's the one Ohio State takes, giving them a top 4 seed. I will say go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other one is I think that there is still a good shot that we could see a back-to-back of Ohio State, Michigan in 2 consecutive weeks. Don't want to count that out because Michigan is incredibly unpredictable. We think Alex Orji is going to start, but it wouldn't shock me if Sherrone Moore pulls a fast one. I don't think it'll be Jack Tuttle. I think it'd be anybody but Jack Tuttle, basically. I think Jack Tuttle's just kind of there as like a GA who's on scholarship.
A Hunter Johnson, if you will. But I will say the funny thing about this October 12th game is that Ryan Day, of course, gets the knock for not winning the big game. He's 1-6 against top 5 teams as Ohio State's head coach, which is pretty terrible, frankly.
And the one game was rigged. The one game that he got was rigged, by the way. But I'm not.
Well, Ohio State was ranked 11th in that game.
Rigged.
Yeah, whatever. But the other thing was like Dan Lanning, he deserves a lot of credit. He deserves to be the new hot thing on the block. He's never won a big game, man.
Yep.
Like he has.
Get the same. He
was 0-3 against top 5 opponents over the last 2 years, including losing both games to Washington, of course. And Washington was really good. It's not like a slight. But I think that the one that's more concerning is the way that they choked away that Oregon State game 2 years ago, back in 2022. Oh, yeah. Like, Dan Lanning's kind of been bad in big games too. Now, look, the reality is everybody's bad in big games until you win big games, and then you're a coach that wins big games. That's just the way that it works, right? We talked about it with Dabo Swinney. Now nobody questions them the same way about it. Yeah, exactly. And so, and I mean, even like Georgia could not do the thing against these top level teams until they did it. And so I think that this is going to be fascinating too, especially with the rematch potentially in the title game, because one of these two coaches will get to kind of exercise that. We'll get to put that away. We'll put that to the side. Both these teams, frankly, like if they're not in the college football playoff, something has gone horribly wrong at one of these programs. But I think that being the team that comes out and wins the Big Ten and wins this matchup of potentially 2 of the top 3 teams in college football, I think that changes the way that we look at one of these coaches.
We got one question. I know we said we were going to go 45 minutes to an hour, and we've doubled that at this point, so we'll keep this one quick. One of our close followers, he's literally called the GOAT follower. He is. But he's a big Penn State guy, and he wants to know what are some reasonable expectations Penn State fans should have. And I know William kind of tipped his toes in it, saying, like, don't be surprised if, but Shehan would love to hear what you think reasonable expectations are for the Mendoza line.
Well, I think here's the thing, right, is that you're allowed to continue to be the Mendoza line as long as you stay like on it / above it, right? And Penn State has done that. They've been a consistent outside of that like 2-year weird COVID whatever, like they have been a consistent 9 to 10 win team every single year. They've been far and away the last 2 years the best team in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State and Michigan. I think it would be nice to get up and compete with Ohio State and Michigan in certain years, but I don't think that, like, I think that Penn State fans should, relatively speaking, be satisfied with just being in that conversation, right? Being as good as anybody, being a team that contends for the college football playoff a lot of years. It would make me feel a lot better for them to have like a 2016 up year, right? Like to just have the year where they break through. I don't see that coming, and that's a little frustrating. but you can't also miss the forest for the trees with Penn State. They've brought really, I mean, again, you look at, of course, the success that they had under Joe Paterno, but like most programs don't have it like this, right? To be a consistent top 15 team, to win 10 games a lot of years. So I think that to me, that is a reasonable program expectation to contend for 10 wins most years. Now that's going to be a college football playoff type season. But I do also think it's fair for Penn State fans to ask, hey, can we have a culmination year, right? Can we have a year where everything breaks right and we at least get one of the elite teams? Now you have a couple more to choose from with Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon potentially in this conference.
So you heard it here first. Shehan said natty or bust for Penn State. the natty and the Lions. There we go.
Oh, goodness. I hope that
feels like 86.
Yeah.
Well, Shehan, we absolutely appreciate you jumping on here. Want to give you a chance to talk about where anybody can find your podcast, anywhere where they can find all of your writings, and give you a chance to give yourself a little pat on the back.
Yeah, you can find all my work at cbssports.com. You can follow my podcast, The College Football Survivor Show, on wherever you get your podcasts. Obviously, you're listening to this one, so you can probably figure it out. You can find all my work at Shehan Jeyarajah. And yeah, we're about to get fully into the season. It's time. It's finally here. I hit 4 of the 9 media days with Mountain West, AAC, SEC, and Big 12. So I'm ready, man. I'm ready for some football.
Yeah, and it's really easy to follow his podcast. I did it during the podcast. You just hit the bell. It's easy. And while you're doing it, go ahead and hit ours too.
Yeah, while you're doing that, go ahead, give his a rate, give ours a rate, give us a listen, give him a listen. And we really appreciate you joining us. I know we definitely both enjoyed having you on. We'd definitely love to have you again sometime later in the future. And then, can't wait for the season. I know we got some camps open up here real soon, so college football will be here before you know it.
Yep. You're officially a 5-star guest, Shehan. Appreciate having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We'll see you guys again next week.